to me a couple weeks ago, and I was really, really angry. So I had a friend who managed to get an interview with like a sort of fringe group leader who never gives them. And the camera guy had assured him he didn't need to keep any notes because he had it all going. And the camera guy had completely screwed it and they lost the whole thing. Was sort of, you let that happen once and it's just gone.
Yeah, it's horrible.
But yes, thanks so much for making time anyway.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I was so glad Jeff kind of set me up with you because he's sort of spot on for a big chunk of what I want to talk about in the book. Do you want me to give you a little bit of background on it, or
sure,
I can jump straight in and ask you questions? But I'm trying to sort of do a book on how the internet works and who controls it that isn't just talking about Facebook, Apple, Google, Amazon as if they're the entirety of the thing. So some of it's about physical infrastructure, some of it's about government, some of it's about sort of data, and some of it's about sort of venture capital and ownership. And so it's trying to kind of go, hey, it's this institution that's a lot more complicated than you think and doesn't always work for the reasons you think. And actually a lot of the reasons Facebook and Google work like they do aren't just because they've decided to, it's because that's how the network works. So it's hopefully, it's got to be critical, I think, rather than negative is the idea. It's got to be trying to evaluate where we are and what we might do. But it is sort of essentially trying to honestly reflect it. And so sort of basically the reason I'm kind of as interested to speak to you as I am is, you led the team that kind of started off us on the road on programmatic advertising. And so I thought that might be a good place to jump in, kind of, why was that needed at the time? Why was that something you wanted to build? Was it something that, was it just like that was the mission that was in front of you, or was it something you kind of thought, this is what we need here now?
Well, I mean, it was sort of an accident that I created it. I didn't mean to. I was working for a little startup called Right Media, which was an ad network.
Yeah.
And my observation was that publishers, like people who had their own websites, would put ad networks on their page to make money, but were being really irrational about which ad network to use. So there's one called FastClick, and they would say, well, we'll pay you $4 CPMs, which was incredibly high at that time.
That's
amazing. What they didn't mention was, but they would throw away anything that wouldn't get a $4 CPM. So you'd give them 1 million impressions, they would monetize 10,000 of them at a $4 CPM. So the publisher's like, I got $4 CPM, but it's meaningless
because they weren't putting anything on the log.
And they're just throwing away everything else. And so the publisher, if they didn't have good technology, wouldn't realize they wasted all that traffic. Whereas our little ad network, we'd get you a 40-cent CPM, but we'd monetize everything. The checks were identical. And so I built a yield management widget, basically, that would try to figure out which ad network to allocate to based on which would make the most money.
So it's almost a metrics thing then initially.
It was, but it didn't work because the ad networks were too dumb. And so I said, well, okay, publishers need smarter ad networks. Why don't we take our really smart ad network software and sell it to all the other ad networks so that it would plug into this yield management more intelligently? Because they couldn't even tell you ahead of time what a given ad was worth. And so it basically became programmatic advertising, where in the blink of an eye, the publisher holds an auction across all the different advertisers, and then the highest bidder wins. So it was built on this idea of helping publishers make more money. Eventually, AppNexus open sourced that, so it's called header bidding now. The idea of before you serve the ad, ask everybody what they'll pay.
I mean, it's become the business model of most of the internet, hasn't it? I mean,
so
that's not an exaggeration.
Right.
What you built there is huge. I mean, it's how, any publisher I've ever worked for works, but how vast sort of swathes of the rest of it do. That must be quite a strange feeling.
It's really strange. It's strange to see people writing books about it. Princeton has a class in their operations research group on this, auction theory. There's tens of thousands of people that work in this industry, billions of dollars of exits. It's very odd to be like, I came up with all this craziness, just a couple blocks over. And now I'm kind of retiring from it all. So
yeah, I saw.
It's kind of like, okay, that was a great 15 years. Now I got to go do something else.
So, yeah, I mean,
so if you need a research assistant, I'm looking.
I'm not sure I could cover your rates, to be honest. But I mean, it is this sort of crazy thing. One thing that keeps repeating for me. I've been talking to some of the early people who built the internet, let alone the web or Wikipedia. People kind of generally say everyone now looks as if we had this grand plan and we knew what we were doing and made very assiduous, considered decisions or idealistic decisions. I went, no, we just built a thing, and then before I knew it, it was.
Yeah.
Does it feel like that for you?
Some does. Because the company where we admitted all this was called Right Media, we sold it to Yahoo in 2007. I had a huge fight with my boss. He was the CEO and I was the CTO.
Yeah.
And he was like, we're selling this thing. Because it was a rocket ship. And I was like, you're crazy. This is going to change the world.
Yeah.
And so we were both right. He fired me and sold the company. And we made a lot of money, which was great. He made
$750 was that?
It was $850.
$850. Ooh.
But he made most of that. I didn't make almost any of that. But I was right that it was going to be the future. Like so in a sense, like it was obvious. What I did was I took the money I made and I invested it into all these other companies because I knew you needed an ecosystem.
Yeah.
And so my way of creating the ecosystem was literally to fund all the companies that would need to be in the space for it to be an actual space. So in some ways, like as it started to get traction, it was more and more like intentional, I guess you would say.
Yeah.
But yeah, in the very beginning, it was just like there's a problem. This little widget will fix it. Oh, well, that widget didn't fix it. Let's fix this and let's fix that. And you sort of get this, almost patchwork, path towards something. And then once it works, you're like, oh, of course I meant that. That was my plan. Look how smart I am.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the complexity of it, like what happens when you visit a website that's showing programmatic ads, which is basically a website. I mean, no one understands it, do they? Like, I researched this. I don't think I understand it. I'm sure you do, but how many people do you think really get what happens when you click a site and start that bit? And do you think it matters if people do or don't?
Well, even in this industry, I don't think people really understand it very well. I mean, when I talk to people, publishers, advertisers, agencies, even people who work at ad tech companies who should know better, there's a lot of gaps. And we create all these acronyms, the DSP and the SSP and all these things. And I'm like, yeah, I was there when we created those acronyms, and they don't mean what you think they mean. They're very handy acronyms, but they don't mean anything. And so what happens is that if you want to confuse someone, say, oh, well, that's the SSP. And I was like, well, it's like any made-up term. It means something different to you than it means to me.
Yeah.
I have the luxury of having built these systems, of seeing it from day one. A good example of this is like GDPR, which is itself so freaking complex that no one understands it, and everyone interprets it differently, and there's all these different local regulations. But then you go a level deeper, and there's entire companies formed around GDPR that are like, well, we're going to see every cookie that the browser drops, and that way we're going to know what happens to the private information. It's like, well, guys, 80-90% of the data transfer is server-side. It never touches the browser.
Yeah.
That's like saying, I know where all the ice is, because of the icebergs that tip out the top. I mean, it's not right.
I mean, it misses data enrichment and then all the
100%.
Processing and all the joining as well.
Totally.
That is enrichment.
So yeah, I think there are handfuls of people who understand it, like really could understand and explain every single link in that chain. But for me, that's 15 years of building the entire thing. I can still explain it all to you, but there's probably 20, 30 people here who can understand all of it without the jargon.
Yeah, I was going to say, go on then. The most jargon-free for a normal person on the internet who might sort of be in their 60s reading this sort of in print, what roughly happens, we can start just before someone clicks a website, but to get them that particular advert that they see, which in my case tends to be for weird meat-themed hoodies at the moment. I'm not sure I want one of those, but maybe if I see it a few more times.
I mean, in some ways, like it's like the actual technical details aren't the point. The point is that, for me at least, your cookie right? Some identifier for you is sent out to